An acid flashback prompted by cannabis, a trip report sent in by a subscriber. About 2 weeks ago, I had the strongest acid flashback I've ever had. It was prompted by a couple joints and a blunt. For some background on me, I'm a 25-year-old woman with a brief history of psychedelic use. I've been living alone for a couple of years now, and a lot has changed about my lifestyle. I'm in a better place than I ever have been. In many ways, I've broken curses I'd never thought would lift, and changed my life to a healthier, more sustainable way of being. I have a Zora festival to thank for this in a lot of aspects. This story takes place after breaking up with someone I'd wanted to spend the rest of my life with. We're still good friends, and it ended on a good note. I'd gone through many trips with this person, and forever cherished them for what we have shared. I've been making some new friends after my breakup, and on this day I'd planned a hangout and smoke session with said friends, even though I needed to be alone that day, because I barely have time for myself alone entirely, especially needed after separation. I was hanging out with them at my studio apartment. My place is dimly lit with candles and fairy lights, 2 stoners on the couch and 2 on the floor. The set and company were A+. We smoked a couple of joints, getting into conversations about life and death and such, then started passing a blunt. By the time it neared the end of the blunt, it had been my turn to smoke. It seemed as though 2 hours had passed since those few joints into the blunt. I started feeling oddly sick and disoriented. I felt a heave come up and was prompted to jolt up from the floor straight into my bathroom with a quick whimper of, "1 sec." And oh boy, that phrase could not be further from the truth. I went in and locked the door behind me, embracing the toilet bowl tightly and throwing up into the tunnel of the toilet seat as I clung for dear life. The first few wheezes, I started to realise I'm entering an LSD flashback, because that's happened a couple of times for me after taking acid, and smoking weed a couple months after acid usually puts me back into the LSD vortex. This time, however, had been like no other. I started violently throwing up, in short bursts at a time. With every time I threw up, it was a different trip. The way I'd been living my life a couple months prior to this was completely destructive. This trip came at a point where things in my life had settled for the better, and things were looking up. It came as a way to seal the deal, to finalise the chapter of my life, and show me that I never need to go there again. This trip essentially took me through all of my addictions one by one, from porn to nicotine, to relationships, and to the addiction of craving feeling extreme emotions at every moment. The major overlay for this trip flashback was my porn addiction. I had lived through every violent pornographic piece of content I'd consumed. I used to get up to some twisted imagery in order to feel anything. Definitely far from CP, so don't misunderstand. I'd also had a morbid curiosity for gore and gruesome content, which I'm highly sensitive to on a visceral level. But I'd consumed it as a child on accident, and grew a curiosity that I cannot describe to watching things on the grey web that you would not bear to look at for 1 second. Thankfully, I'm much more recovered mentally, and only treat myself in higher regard now. Going back into the trip, throwing up the first round as a warning for me that this is going to be a tough flashback. I'm not so sure, but I believe I'd thrown up a clot of blood at some point because of how violent it had been, and my stomach was completely empty that day. I was in that bathroom, on the floor over the toilet, for 2 hours, head spinning and shattering into a million pieces over and over, going through loops of suffering where I'd felt my body actively decaying as I swung between life and death. No exaggeration. My breath itself was shoved out of my body into the harshest form possible with every gag reflex, as my insides felt as though they'd been ripped out of me over and over again. I heard my internal monologue arguing at different sides, my voice freaking out, my voice trying to keep me quiet so my friends aren't worried further, my voice saying, "Take it," as I felt a penis violently penetrating my throat for 3 minutes straight without a single breather. In every sense, I was dying, and one of my voices, naturally a dominant protector, was calming me, telling me I'd survived this, and that I knew better than to do this to myself in a built-up way through my addictions. It had kept me patient through the agony as I followed its guidance. It's one of the voices in me that does not cast judgments, only guides. Another inner voice that helped me was one that pushed me to physically get up off the floor after my friends had gone, and another that was consoling me. I'm very lucky to be able to recognise my internal parts in this way, but that's beside the point. I'd gotten up after my friend, who was the only one who stayed to make sure I'm okay, was worried sick for me. I'd unlocked the door and crashed back onto the floor. He helped me up and calmed me until I went to bed. Then, he was on his way after making sure I'm okay with water and food by my side. This flashback was more of a mental journey than it was visual. Despite seeing some prolonged, painful, closed-eye visuals at some parts, this had also been a reminder to respect my personal boundaries in being alone when I need to be, as this all-encompassing flashback also served as a lesson to listen to my gut. I'm so grateful that it happened, despite the pain I'd gone through. It was a perfect way to end the first month of the year, as it had begun with an entirely new perspective on life. This was a final purge to release a lot of pain in ways that I felt inescapable of releasing. I hope this resonates with at least one person, as I'm sure there is a multitude of souls experiencing similar realities. Thanks for taking the time. Hope this was interesting to indulge. Cheers. This was a really interesting report because I find the idea of acid flashbacks triggered by cannabis really quite fascinating, because there's a lot of speculation on what's actually going on. Psych Substance did a really good video on this like 6 years ago called Weed is Different After Psychs. And like he says, there's not lots of scientific evidence for this really. It's just a lot of anecdotal reports of people who've been taking psychedelics for years, stoners especially, who obviously a lot of stoners actually incorporate weed into their daily lives or just enjoy a smoke every now and then. And after doing more psychedelics, something sort of switches in the brain. It's almost like their consciousness is rewired from taking so many psychedelics that when they actually consume cannabis, it can feel like a full-blown trip, sort of, without the visuals, with visuals. It's different for everybody. And so that's sort of what we deem these acid flashbacks. I don't actually think it's cannabis is somehow bringing out LSD in your brain, or it brings it out of your spinal cord, or whatever other mad theories people have. But that's just me. I just think that when you take psychedelics so much and you're having all these crazy altered states that you experience, and you become more conscious of consciousness itself and the complexity of reality, that your relationship with psychoactive substances changes big time. Because it's not just it's not just limited to cannabis. It can be for anything. Like a lot of people I know say who use dissociatives like ketamine, after they've taken psychedelics for years, that even ketamine feels different. It's not just like getting absolutely zombified and just feeling dissociated. It's like literally being transported to another world and having extremely profound, mystical, transcendent experiences through other chemicals. So it's sort of like the psychedelics open up your brain from sort of like the normie, neurotypical mind of just, oh, I'm just taking this thing that makes my brain do funny things, and you start having seriously profound experiences, and then that alters your relationship with every other psychoactive substance that also has the potential to bring it out, but couldn't because you didn't jailbreak your mind beforehand. So you can jailbreak your mind through psychedelics. You can sort of unlock its true potential, and for some people this is really good. They can now treat cannabis in a more spiritual sense, because obviously cannabis has been used in spiritual traditions for fucking ages, so it can actually be very positive for people. But I'd say, like, for me, it's a bit of 50-50. Like I say, I just now do not smoke weed on the regular at all anymore, because I have what a lot of people also attest to in say the comment section of Psych Substance's video, where I just literally get a bad trip and I start contemplating like the suffering of mankind in such a negative way, which I don't do at all in my sober state, and it really doesn't affect me very well. And I think the reason for that is because it sounds a bit woo-woo, a bit out there to say, but this is just the feeling that it gives me, is like the cannabis experience is sort of punishing me for just being like, oh, I just want to get blazed and chill out and relax. And it's sort of reminding me that I am avoiding things about my consciousness, my shadow, that I need to address and sort of fess up to and integrate. Because oftentimes, stuff comes up from my personal life that say I've not been thinking about, or I try to stop thinking about, and push it into my subconscious, and the cannabis basically releases that into the mindset of the experience. But often in a sort of negative, unpleasurable sense, I get seriously bad tachycardia where my heart just goes really badly, and I know if I have a really fast heartbeat, that it gives me a lot of anxiety and tension, and it really feels quite horrible. But then other times, when I'm feeling, especially when I've started meditating again recently, and then I had a joint overnight. I literally just had like 1 or 2 little tokes in it because that's all I can hack, especially because my tolerance is so low now, and like all my mates smoke these unbelievably potent buds, so I also have to be careful with it like that, because their tolerances to it are sky high, and they just like sort of get stoned. And then when I have it, I just got to be careful, gauge it. And the other night I had a really cool experience. I just felt really blissful, and the classic sort of stoned, relaxed, chilling, munchies, having a good laugh with my mates. And it was really quite nice, because then every time there'd be sort of some negative experience or thought that comes in my mind, I just let it wash away. That was probably because I've been meditating, and it just shows to me that, it's going really well, because in my actual sort of psychoactive mindset, I'm managing to sort of integrate the negativity, in a sense that if I wasn't meditating, I was just in my sober egoic state where I push stuff into my subconscious. When I smoke cannabis, it brings out the dark side. But I've never actually experienced anything as intense as what this woman went through. It sort of sounded similar to a purging experience I had with ayahuasca, where you're literally like sort of physically having to purge like the toxicity out of your system by throwing up or just releasing it in any other myriad of ways through some other orifice. But yeah, oftentimes these experiences, as unpleasant as they can be to go through it at the time, they are extremely cathartic, and I'm really happy that it ended up working out well for this woman. These are, again, some of my favourite types of reports. The negative and positive qualities sort of like merge together into becoming an even higher sense of positivity. So you've got to sort of have them dualities to sort of conjoin and transmute into this beautiful developing experience that you can have. So yeah, these are from my favourites. I know, again, like I say in all these commentaries, some people get annoyed that I don't just focus on it all just has to be good from start to finish, and I just think, nah, there's way more. The depth to these psychedelic experiences is often the cathartic purging rituals that they put you through. Another bit that also caught my attention was that she had to sort of acknowledge the sort of twisted addictions and morbid curiosity that she's had towards violent porn and like gore videos, which I also think is really interesting. Something that doesn't get talked about enough is that people unconsciously can consume sort of this like messed up imagery, messed up content through anything, even on YouTube. It doesn't even have to be like absolutely like messed up sort of gore videos. It can just be also sort of brainwashing sort of talk show hosts, sort of like extreme conspiracy theorists who are trying to brainwash you and indoctrinate you into their ideologies, and then it can be the other sort of stuff, sort of hyper fixating on the immense pain and suffering of the human experience, which can actually seriously cloud your judgment and seriously toxify your mindset. I'm not saying you should just fill your life with just love and positivity and joy all the time, but you do have to have a balance. There has to be a balance. You can't get fixated on either aspect of reality, because then that will cloud your judgment and you won't have the balance, because the balance of life is so important, and even in the content you consume, that is really important. It can seriously dilute your mind when you get attached to these things, and it's just not something that you should be wasting your energy on either side of it. Like, sometimes you can get too hyper fixated on just like pure positivity and joy, and that makes you a bit naive. Then you can just get hyperfixated on too much pain and suffering, which makes you like darkly nihilistic. Because there's good and bad forms of nihilism, in my opinion, and not even nihilism, just like pure, just fucking like complete negativity toward pessimism towards life. So both sides sort of have to balance out, and you have to see the beauty in the duality. So yeah, I'm really happy for this woman's crazy little cannabis-induced acid flashback experience. Very fascinating, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. I'll do some more like these in the future. So stay safe, boys and girls.